We're okay, aren't we? But it is working.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the North Norfolk District Council Overview and Scrutiny Committee on Wednesday, the 13th of December. And the first item on our agenda is to receive apologies.
I've received apologies from Councillors Bull and Councillor Cushing.
Thank you. Any substitutes?
No substitutes.
Thank you. Public questions and statements?
None received.
None. Thank you. Moving on to item 4, the minutes of the last meeting. So that's the meeting that we held on the 15th of November. If we can just go through them page by page for accuracy, please. Page 1, 2. Councillor Hylston.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm
Morning.
sorry to kick things off. There's a small omission. I asked a question of Serco as to what type of
Is it on
pesticide.
page 1 or?
It comes up, well, it sort of runs in a little bit. It's a question about the pesticide, which was omitted from these minutes. Serco are using glyphosate, which, as you know, is carcinogenic. And I did ask that question specifically as to what sort of pesticides they were using, and it's not minuted. Fine.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. On page 1, I'm conscious that Councillor Cushing was noted as a member attending when he should have been as a committee member. So yeah, page 2, page 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. Are you content that they are a fair and accurate record? Could I have a show of hands on that, please? Thank you. That looks unanimous. Thank you. I think Councillor Toy, you wanted to add, make a comment. Is that correct?
Just to feed back to you, Mr. Chairman, from the fact that you sent to us the to the Governance Risk and Audit Committee a request to look at the coastwise risks, which we did. We looked through the whole suite of risks which were well presented to us. We offered a couple of suggestions, which was some additional information setting out the consequences of the risks and additional information setting out the impact of the mitigation actions. We also discussed the processes they have in place to ensure that there was continuity around key personnel and that information was shared appropriately. And we discussed it and was happy that those processes are in place. So all in all, it was a good suite of risks, which we as a committee were happy with. Thank you. With those 2 additions that I've mentioned here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any follow-up questions for Councillor Toy in relation to that? No. Okay, thank you. Just before we move off the minutes, we had a follow-up action from Officer Hems in relation to the gap analysis questions or the gap analysis that we discussed briefly at our last meeting, and he supplied us with an update of that gap analysis. He's not able to join us this morning, so I have suggested to him that if you have any questions relating to that gap analysis, then by all means raise them this morning, and he will then provide written answers to us in respect of those. Are there any questions arising from that gap analysis? No. Okay, right. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on then to item 5. Item 5 is the items of urgent business. I'm not aware of. Thank you very much. Item 6 is declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest in respect to today's business? No? Okay, thank you. Item 7, petitions from members of the public. I'm not aware of any either. Thank you. Item 8 is consideration of any matter referred to the committee by a member. I'm not aware of any. Item 9 is responses of the council or the cabinet to committee reports or recommendations. Nothing. Thank you. Right. Turning then to item 10. Item 10 is the beginning of, I think, the Councillor Shire's show today. Is that right? That's the draft revenue budget, which for 2024-25, and it includes the medium-term financial strategy. So, Councillor Shires, you may take it that we as members have read the papers sufficiently. So I will leave it to you to introduce and add anything that you think might be relevant to what we have already before us. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, yes, this is a committee full of my papers today, and looking into the future, that seems to be the way that we are going forward. So apologies, you'll get to hear me a lot over the coming months. The paper's really well set out. I just want to remind the committee that this is pre-scrutiny. So this isn't gone to cabinet. This hasn't been seen by any other committee. You're the first group of people for this to come in front of. And this is part of the way that we work to set our budget. So when you look at paragraph 1, which tells you what the purpose of this report is, just that we're mindful that we stay on track. This is to show where we think we will be if we don't make any changes to how we are budgeting currently. So it informs us of how we're going to create the budget for the next financial year. But we're also looking for recommendations to cabinet when this comes to cabinet to achieve the savings that we know we're going to have to make to balance the budget for the next financial year. The context is very clearly set out in 2.2. You heard me speak last month when we did the budget monitoring about the impact of temporary accommodation and what that's having on our budget overall. That again is mentioned in 2.3, and unless one of the officers in the room can advise me differently, we haven't had anything from central government to suggest that they're going to work towards helping us meet the need of homelessness across the district and of course across the entire country. Under 3.3, if we look at the line about the second home premium, members who were in the last term would know that we'd agreed for the second homes premium to be introduced. Unfortunately, legislation was delayed. So when we set the budget last year, we had incorporated that into the next financial year, but we've had to delay it a year again, which is one of the contributory issues that we have there. That's mentioned in 3.5. And of course, we won't know how much money we're going to get from government until I believe it's about the 18th of December. That's not a unique position to us. That's all councils across the country are in that position. So we're not hearing any murmurings from central government at the moment that they're going to do anything different, although they're being lobbied quite hard to do so. We're not hearing anything. They're not making any noises, unfortunately, currently. The only thing that I will ask is that when we did the corporate plan, I sat at this committee and asked all members to take an approach of how we work best for North Norfolk. So I'm asking the committee to do that again when we're looking at how we can get a balanced budget for the next financial year. Thank you.
Thank you. Officer Stangley, would you wish to add anything to that?
As Councillor Shires has very well presented the report, I appreciate your report presentation. You've covered most of the points. Also included within the report is the impact of pay inflation at 3.4 and what the increase in the budget or reduction in budget would be if we altered the percentage that we've currently got included at 5%. There's an option there of 3.5 or 7%. We could go with various options and it would reduce it or increase it accordingly. The budget, as we can see, isn't balanced, and we have to arrive at a position whereby we have got a balanced budget for presentation at full council in February. We are going to have to look at service delivery and any ideas are being sought from managers at the moment, and we intend to have a list of possible savings from managers by the end of this week and then consider them so that we can actually look at budget position again, and then we will be reporting back to Cabinet at the beginning of February. An overview and scrutiny will have another chance of pre-scrutiny prior to that meeting, where you can again make suggestions on the savings that are proposed in order to set a balanced budget.
Okay, thank you. Can I just, for clarification, in respect of paragraph 3.3, you've got 1.810 as being the projected gap for next year. In reality, taking into account where we are as of today, looking at an overspend of 600,000, is that correct, on the current year? So in reality, shouldn't we really be looking at the gap as being 2.4 rather than 1.8? Is that the degree of challenge? Is that a reasonable interpretation, or do you see it differently?
That's not my current understanding, although Officer Stanley can correct me, because the overspend that we're looking for in this year with regard to the temporary accommodation, we're looking to balance that off by the end of the year. We're not looking to have to carry that over. If the question you're asking is, are we going to foresee that we're going to see the same inflated costs and need for the homelessness services that we provide? Yes, we will. I can't see that changing currently, but Officer Stanley can add any more depth to that.
Yes, as officers, we're seeking to reduce the overspend down to a minimum by the end of this financial year. So I'm looking at balancing the budget for 24-25, which currently there's a gap of the 1.8 million at the moment.
Okay. Questions? Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I'm just thinking on that point there with the homelessness and the rising costs there, whether there is a role for this committee in looking at some of the drivers to that. And I think we've heard before at full council that domestic abuse is one of those. So whether at some point we invite our police and crime commissioner back in to have a look at those sorts of issues, because I think they're not going to go away, particularly given the current economic crisis as well. So whether there's a slightly wider point, so some of the drivers for the deficits around the homelessness issue, I think might be worth us having a look at. Thank you.
Good. Any other questions or points? The holiday.
Sorry, can we just go back to that 600,000? In paragraph 2.3, it says that 600,000 is enduring. Well, we hope not, but that's what it says for next year. So I still don't understand why it's not added to the 1.8. That was one question. And I have another question about the actual budget lines for the different departments. And it's showing that over the period to 27-28, we've got an increase of 300,000 on resources and 600 on communities. And I wondered what that was and whether there was the opportunity to possibly make savings there. And I had one other question, which was the medium term finance.
Hold that question just for a moment. Yep. We'll take one at a time.
My understanding is that the costs that we anticipate for homelessness are incorporated, but as I said, I'd like Officer Stanley to add any extra information to that if that's not the case.
Because my understanding is that that is within the 1.8 as well. Yeah.
Okay, well, it might be quite nice if it was in a line item so that I didn't have,
Wouldn't it?
I wasn't totally confused about it, but I get your point, thank
Your second question. Your microphone.
you. Sorry, I've had COVID, my brain is all over the place. The general fund summary, so at the top, this is page 31, and we have increases of 600,000 on the communities and 300,000 over the period to 27-28 of 300,000. And I wondered if there was opportunities for savings there, because I would expect it to hopefully be controlled.
The,
Right.
yeah, the savings will be, I mean, the, any increases in inflation and contract costs will be cumulative. So, there's the salary increase of 5% in 24-25. So the base of 25-26 will be 105% plus 3.5% and so on. So that's why you see the increases. And yes, we are looking at making savings and looking at service delivery to bring those figures down. A lot of work will be undertaken over the next few weeks to review that and bring the expenditure down as far as possible and look at ways of increasing any income that we can have.
Right.
So this is part of the annual budget cycle. The reasons that there is a gap emerging for 2024-25 is the delayed implementation of the second home council tax premiums. So it's £550,000 next year that we have to close as an organisation that we anticipated would be we would be able to charge from the 1st of April 2024. But due to the delays in the House approving the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, we aren't able to implement. We, local government nationally, not Norfolk District Council, isn't able to implement that from the 1st of April until the 1st of April 2025. So we've got a £550,000 gap to close in next year's budget that wasn't previously anticipated. I think the cost, particularly around communities, is in relation to homelessness. You will read through the national local government press and indeed national media that there are a number of key drivers that are impacting on local government finances at this time. For unitary and upper tier authorities, there are particular pressures in adult social care and in children's services. And there's recently been reports on homeschool transport costs nationally. For unitary authorities and district authorities, there is acute pressure around homelessness duties and temporary accommodation. And the Deputy Leader of the Council, Portfolio Holder, Councillor Fredericks, has outlined to full council, and I think will again, what those pressures are. She was one of 4 councillors that presented to a recent emergency summit on the drivers for increasing homelessness costs. Those issues are complex, and it may be that you do wish to decide to have a discussion on that at a future meeting as proposed by Councillor Penfold. The issues and drivers are complex and multiple. They are not, though, and it's important I think I say this, they are driven by local issues in North Norfolk. They are not driven by us accommodating refugees or asylum seekers, because I know that that is something that has been raised by some local residents. That is not a driver here in North Norfolk per se, although our ability to source accommodation outside of the district for homelessness duty considerations and appraisal arising in the district may be influenced by that, because the costs of short-term accommodation in hotels is being driven up by pressure nationally on that sector. So that's been seen universally across the country. We are not isolated or immune from that, but I think the £600,000 costs which Councillor Holliday has asked over the 5 years, 23, 24 through to 27, 28, that £600,000 I think reflects that anticipation that those costs are going to remain high. The cost of placing homeless households pending our consideration of their duty or securing them permanent accommodation is a significant cost to this authority and remains so. We obviously had a policy in recent times of acquiring property so that we can provide secure temporary accommodation in districts that's self-contained, but that isn't meeting our needs. So we've got, I think, 21 or 22 units now that we've purchased, that we place homelessness household duty considerations in, but that isn't meeting our need at the present time. I think at the present time we've got 70 households in temporary accommodation who we are appraising a duty for, or we have accepted a duty for, but we haven't been able to place them in permanent accommodation, and that is driving those costs.
Thank you. Councillor Vickers.
Thank you to Mr. Blatch for his in-depth explanation. I nevertheless think that Councillor Penfold has made a worthy point that we need to have a deep dive, a very in-depth look at the drivers of homelessness in our local environment, things such as domestic violence.
I've got Councillor Holliday and Councillor Housen.
Thank you, Chair. My other question was, is it the fact that this is a pre-scrutiny paper that the medium-term financial strategy isn't really fleshed out? I mean, is that what you're expecting to do over the next month or so? Because I didn't see an awful lot about that. I see the plan, you could say, okay, we've got a medium-term financial plan because we're going out to 27, 28, but I don't see a strategy of how the money is being controlled. Is that what is the strategy actually going to be in the paper that we see in February? Thank you.
Yes, I can provide more detail in a strategy in February.
Yes, I mean, just picking up on that point, I know in the past we have had the two papers separate and they were listed as separate, were they not? Somehow or other they have been conflated. Councillor Shires, are you able to explain that?
It is our intention that when we have got beyond this step and into the actual budget planning based on the conversations we've had about where we can make savings, it's our intention, I've spoken to Officer Stankley about it, to actually provide more detail, because I would like personally to be able to monitor that throughout. And I know it's been the wish of this committee to have a better handle on are we doing what we said we were going to do in terms of the longer term finances of this council. And it's something that we obviously talked about through the corporate plan setting process. So it is my intention. This paper isn't that, because this is a pre-scrutiny of where we think we will be if we don't do anything. So there will be a better detailed standing point of what we intend to do coming forward.
Okay.
I'll just add that will be to the February cabinet meeting.
February cabinet. Councillor Brown.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Oh,
for
sorry,
giving
beg your
me-
pardon. I beg your pardon. Councillor Housden and then Councillor Brown. Thank you for
Okay,
that.
I'll give
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just have an explanation on just two figures? Our net zero initiatives were half a million. Is that just a one-off situation?
We've set aside a reserve for initiatives. Those we will consider as they come through, idea by idea, initiative by initiative. We will have to see where we sit in terms of the funding that we have available after we've been through the detailed budget exercise for the cabinet meeting on the beginning of February. I can't remember what date it is quite. The 8th, I think. If we have sufficient funds available, then we'll continue to set some more aside. It was intended to be topped up and kept at a relatively decent level so that initiatives could take place. But to say it will depend on the situation in terms of what finances we've got available.
Okay. And just secondly, retained business rates drop down by 2.2 million when we get into the projection for 25-26. Is there reasoning behind that at the moment?
Yeah, that is an area that we are still looking at. I anticipate it to get increase, but I need assurance myself that those levels are going to actually increase. I need to have a look at that in more detail.
And so the level at 5.1 million, if we look at 25-26, is that a figure with which you have significant confidence, or is that not?
We have two models that we use at the moment for business rates, and the model that we normally use is coming through with a prediction at that level. But again, it will depend upon the financial settlement and looking at things such as the decoupling of the multiplier, the small business rates multiplier and the standard business rates multiplier. We've got quite a lot of work to do in terms of tweaking those models and coming up with a more accurate figure that we can rely on. Yeah.
Fine. Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Blatch.
Thank you, Chairman. So I think that the figures anticipate or that they're a degree of caution in this respect, in that the government has been promising a revision of business rates for some time, and that has been deferred and delayed, as has the fair funding review. And so we don't have certainty into the future. Local government has been asking for certainty for a number of years away from individual annual settlements, but that hasn't concluded as a piece of work. So I think we anticipate that in a new government after the general election, that there will be further consideration and review of business rates and how that plays out. Obviously, there's concern around the strength of high streets, the fact that there is a differential of competitive advantage perhaps in terms of online purchases and warehouses, and whether they are adequately reflected or in the business rating scheme. But there hasn't been a national revision as was proposed, and I think the position that's outlined in this table that suggests that there will be uncertainty in that respect from 25-26 is a cautionary position for us to adopt. We would hope that it wouldn't fall back by as much as is suggested here, but I think it's cautious rather than optimistic.
I think, yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for that. I think the point is, and the point behind my question, in fact, Mr. Chairman, was that many of the businesses in Fakenham are closing because of the business rates, and business rates are penalising their business. And as Mr. Blatch has rightly pointed out, the business is coming offline and footfall is dropping. So the context of retained business rates and what that level might be is a serious worry, I think, not only to the businesses in the high street, but to this district council. But thank you for the explanation.
Great. Councillor Brown and then Councillor Holiday.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Councillor Holiday raised the issue of on a point about future strategy. We've also alluded to the fact that the levelling up and regeneration bill has delayed the introduction of until the 1st of April 2025 of the struggling here second homes premium, I think we might refer to it as. And I also note that there's going to be a delay in the election of a chairman for the county until May 2025 instead of next year.
Leader, isn't it?
Well, you could call it leader or chairman, call it what you want.
Directly elected leader.
Yes, yeah, directly elected leader. Until after the date on which the second homes premium will come into effect by probably a month or so. So everything's been pushed back by a year in effect to 2025. So we've got two potential revenue streams that are coming down the track in the future, which we can't really take into account. We wish we could at this particular stage, and that is the funding through the county deal and the second homes premium. Now, what I would like to know is whether but it's probably a question for the chief executive is whether the county deal is likely to have any influence or no influence at all. It's perhaps useful to know either way on the negotiations that this district will have with the county council, who potentially will be in receipt of the second home premium receipts, estimated to be, given all the number of second homes we have in this district, about £6 million. So it would be useful to have an indication as to how much of that cake we may potentially get our hands on, because I suspect that might just have a slight influence on how we plan our budgeting moving forward, even at this stage, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether Mr. Blatch has brought his crystal ball this morning, but or whether it's well polished.
Well, that's a very kind get out of jail free card, Chairman. So in terms of the application of second homes council tax premium, we have a significant stock of second homes in the district. We don't know whether, as a result of the implementation of the new legislation, people will seek to switch or amend the classification of their property to a business rated charge as a holiday home rather than a second home, by allowing third party use of those properties. So the figures that we have in terms of the percentage that would come to North Norfolk is an estimate. Only 8 pence in every pound of council tax collected with a collection authority sits with North Norfolk District Council. So the 8 pence delivers that at £550,000. There will be 74 pence of every pound goes to Norfolk County Council as the upper tier authority. So they will also benefit from that second homes premium. And it's always been suggested that there would be a conversation between the leader of this authority and the leader of the county council, with an aspiration to see the bulk of that additional premium collected in North Norfolk being spent on housing, affordable housing supply and development here in this district, because otherwise there is a risk that that money would not deliver a benefit into North Norfolk, where the impact of those second homes was most greatly felt, and it could be spent to meet the wider pressures which the Norfolk County Council has as an upper tier authority across the whole geography of the county. So to answer Councillor Brown's question, there isn't certainty over how that money will be spent. There does need to be a conversation between the leader of this council and, for the moment, the appointed leader of Norfolk County Council. If there is then a change of governance next July, as per the County Council decision yesterday to move forward with a county deal with a directly elected leader in May 2025, at the same time as the County Council elections. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what the outcome of that election might be in terms of the position of the directly elected leader at that time. And I think that will be reflected in terms of their manifesto pledges or commitments at that time. But it's something that we have to be mindful of. In terms of the wider county deal, or the commitment made by the County Council yesterday to move forward and to progress that, there are some additional monies that would come to the county as a result of that decision. There's a £20 million investment fund. There's £7 million for brownfield development in the first year. We would be able to make bids or access or potentially access those funds in conjunction and agreement with the county council through their cabinet processes as exists under the current governance model, and then into the future with a relationship with a directly elected leader. But the majority of those benefits would be proportional in terms of the county as a whole, so they wouldn't directly impact on our budget. We would need to align some of our activities with those aspirations through that investment fund. And then there's also devolved administration or control of adult education budgets from 2026 within Norfolk across the DWP, the FE sector, which we would seek to influence, but we don't have very significant budgets for adult education or post 16 or 18 training as a council ourselves. So that would be a collaborative collaborative venture rather than directly being shown in your budget here. I think you should stick on those opportunities that are in the figures in front of you and see any opportunities through the directly elected leader or the county deal as being additional that you would build on or seek to have influence over, but they wouldn't be reflected ordinarily in the budget decisions that you're being asked to take today and in the weeks ahead through until February of this year.
Thank you for that. I think it's a wise position to take for the time being. A couple of points arising from the debate yesterday that might be relevant to what you've raised. One is that whilst it's called a county deal, it's not a deal for Norfolk County Council per se, it is a deal for the county. And the second part of that is that there was a wish and a willingness to involve city, borough and district councils in the running of affairs, if you like, in relation to that county deal when that's in place. So for as long as that intent remains there for district councils and so forth, secondary authorities to be a part of those discussions, I think it would be reasonable to say that there is a positive attitude there and potential there, but it would be unwise, I think, for us to build anything in at this stage, particularly in respect of our medium-term financial strategy, to say that this is going to be a problem solver for us, because I don't think that would be a wise position to take at all. So if that helps, then I think that clarifies perhaps some of what you've raised. It is undoubtedly there are a lot of unknowns there, and not until July next year will we know whether there actually is going to be a directly elected leader. So the decision that was taken yesterday didn't actually make that decision. It merely made the decision to take up the opportunity for a level 3 agreement for a county deal. So there are some subtleties there that probably aren't apparent to the casual observer, if you like, of that. Councillor Holly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that clarification.
Thank you. Just going back to the council house, the second homes premium. Are we saying then, because I think we've spoken about this before, that we're going to earmark it for affordable housing, and therefore we're not going to apply it as a against the gap as we would any other excess revenue? It's a way it says an earmarked fund and can't be applied to that gap. Thank you.
That's a political decision that so you've got a £550,000 coming into the authority at today's estimates, because I say that figure could change, and that you haven't got a choice of spending that in 24-25, so it's a decision post April 2025. There is a political choice around that in terms of how you allocate that money, whether you take it into the base, whether you make it available for affordable housing delivery. I think there is a desire to move in that direction, but we are an authority that provides extensive range of discretionary services, particularly in terms of tourism infrastructure, public conveniences, leisure and well-being services, and there will be uncomfortable choices to be made moving forward in terms of how you spend your resource, including that £550,000.
Okay. Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just coming back to Councillor Houseton's point, actually, looking at page 31 and the net zero initiatives. I'm just trying to understand a bit more about the budgeting for that or those initiatives, and I do take the points you made there, Officer Stagley, on the fact there's 500,000 in there now, and there appears to be nothing going forward. So I just raised the question as, you know, getting to net zero across our operations by 2030 takes planning, obviously, and budgeting, I would have thought. So is there a risk that we're not going to get there if we don't adequately budget for it? Or are you saying we're sort of responding to, you know, if we need to do this to get to net zero in 25, 26, we'll kind of do it? How does it work?
Yes, in 23-24, we made a contribution to set up that net zero initiatives reserve of 500,000, and that's available for schemes coming forward, initiatives coming forward. It is a balancing act, and you know, it is priorities and decisions in terms of, do we want to set more aside for green initiatives and net zero initiatives? You know, what are our priorities in terms of what we wish to fund, and also, you know, what we have available in terms of funding to provide services, and those are the decisions that will need to be made over the coming weeks and months. Yes, if members are minded to increase that, then we will have to find a way to do that. Yeah.
So more of a political thing we're talking about there. I guess I'm just nervous that, you know, we've made this commitment. It's a big public commitment, and if we don't adequately budget for it, and I take your point, we don't quite know what that budgeting might be at the minute, but nevertheless, the commitment is there to get us to net zero by 2030. So we need to be prepared to do what we said we would do in that sense. Thank you.
Mr. Black, did you want to respond?
So this was the 500,000 was a commitment made by the previous administration to deliver at pace around net zero investments or conversions. There are obviously some property maintenance and capital budgets that we have in anyway, which we can tweak or amend to incorporate net zero measures. The concern that we have to be mindful of, though, is from 2030, there will be a requirement to offset. So there'll be a tariff, a penalty, if you like. So we are trying to front load those investments, particularly in our carbon footprint, to minimise that offsetting tariff. I think the year is 2030. We have proposed, in respect of the peer review, to establish a decarbonisation strategic group, so that all decisions the authority makes will be informed by the carbon impact of net zero impact of our decisions, because we think we need to be better informed around understanding not just the financial cost, but the carbon price of decisions that the authority takes. But at the moment, that 500,000, as Mrs. Stangley has said, is a starting point. It's not funded as an additional sum of money beyond the current £500,000.
Okay. Councillor Shires.
Yeah, I just wanted to possibly put Councillor Penfold's mind at rest there a little bit. Net zero isn't just that budget line, it's the way that we're operating as a council, so it's in daily decision making. And if you want to come and meet with Officer Tanner in the property services team, who was possibly one of the biggest skeptics of net zero, who's now fully embracing every single aspect of what property services can do in their daily operation to help us get to where we need to be. This is a day-to-day thing. The budget line is there, but it's in the mind of every single officer. So just because we haven't budgeted going forward doesn't mean we're not going to be taking steps. But obviously, if you'd have asked me 5 years ago, would I have ever foreseen us being in this position? We hadn't had a pandemic and a cost of living and now a homelessness crisis. So we have to understand that as a council, we are reactive to what our residents, our neighbours, our friends and our families need as a district, but it doesn't change the day-to-day way that we operate.
Okay. Councillor Housden and then Councillor Withington.
Mr. Chairman, two things. Building controls jumping around a little bit. It's going from, let's say, 90,000 to 122, and then a projection of 12,000. I'd just like a bit of an explanation on that, and also coast protection. I mean, that's something that is undoubtedly going to be crucial over the coming years. Can we just have a little bit more information regarding those two figures, please? Building control and coastal protection, and the future of those two.
Who'd like to respond on that? Councillor Stanley.
The figures that you see there are the use of the reserves. So, say with building control, it may be that we've got some planned use of that reserve. We can see 89,000 in 23-24, and then planned use 122, and it drops off to 11. It's not actually the cost of the service, it's the use of a earmarked reserve that we've set aside for building control for a particular purpose. It may be to fund posts up until that point, and then it will be that, you know, maybe a fixed term post, or I'm not sure with building control. I don't know whether obviously future can say anything about building control or not. I'm not sure at this point in time. So this table is the use of reserves, and this is what we've planned to do. And it will be for meeting a specific purpose, either an initiative or staffing up to a point in time if they're on fixed term. And it's all planned and it's all been set aside previously. So I don't see it as being a concern, because it is planned and what we've already agreed to do. Yeah.
You put your microphone on, please.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. So that's planned in the context of these figures, which I understand. But if we take in that into account and coastal protection, there's an earmark there, and presumably for both building control and coast protection, we will get notes, so we fully understand for the future what those earmarked elements are for definitively.
Yes, the purpose of the earmarked reserves can be found in our statement of accounts, which have a description of each earmarked reserve, but we can include that in the notes that will come to Cabinet in February with the details for each service. It's a much bigger, more comprehensive paper and gives you the detailed service by service, and also the use of those actual reserves will be in there as well.
And so for coastal protection, are we looking at our assets in that context, or a wider sphere?
It's whatever work we're doing in coastal protection work. I would assume it was all on our assets rather than other.
So therefore it would be prudent then for 25, 26, 27, 28 to have some form of projection in there, because obviously there's going to be a cost, and it would be sensible to cost that forward, would it not?
Well, we are doing, we've got significant schemes of Cromer and Munsley going
Yeah.
on and coastwise, and this use of this reserve for coastal protection will be, I suspect, additional works on top of that, but we have the budget for the major schemes that are going ahead over the next few years. So we will be doing lots of coastal protection work.
Right, thank you.
Mr. Blatch, want to respond? No. Councillor Whittington.
Thank you, Chair. Some of my question, I think, has been answered in the same way, in that I'm looking at the planning revenue line in that reserves table. So I assume that's a similar idea, but I was wondering whether that related to the land registry charge changes, and was wondering how that impacts in that budget in here. I couldn't quite pick that out.
The changes to land registry will be included above the line in the services, the net cost of services. So the reduction in income that will receive, reduction in any costs, and also any contribution from the government's transitional arrangement grants will be included within the net cost of services rather than within the earmarked reserves usage going forwards.
Right, okay. Councillor Penfold.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chair, just to come back on the point I raised at the start of whether we want to deep dive with any of the those sort of who might be responsible for some of the drivers for homelessness, as it were. I haven't phrased that very well, but you know what I mean. Would we decide that now, or when we have a look at the work programme going forward?
I guess I'm coming to that now.
I apologise.
Not at all. I'm just mindful that we've been delving in amongst the detail, so to speak, whereas and so far, I think other than that, we are a bit short of recommendations. We are at a pre-scrutiny stage, so there is some time here, and we will have a chance to come back to this again. So shouldn't we be looking at, I mean, in very simple terms, the options that are open to us are rather limited in a sense, because you've either got to reduce your costs, or you've got to raise your income, or you've got to take money from reserves, and by and large, that would be with a caveat that you are going to reinvest to save, unless you're going to make a conscious decision to run your reserves down for a particular year. And so when it comes to looking at costs, reducing costs, are we going to look at efficiencies? Are we going to look at service redesign? Are we going to look again at what we've got in the corporate plan delivery budget? Are we going to look at temporary accommodation, how those pressures are rising? When it comes to income, are we going to be looking at raising charges, new income streams? What are we going to be doing on council tax? When it comes to reserves, for example, and perhaps some opportunities for invest to save, is there a connection here between invest to save and homelessness and our temporary accommodation costs? Is there more to be done? Chief Executive has mentioned that what we've done so far. Is there more that we can do? Those are all issues which I would suggest are at a fairly high level and that we would wish to see work done. Now, clearly, there isn't a great deal of time in respect to 24-25, but in amongst all this is the medium-term financial strategy, and you'll see how those figures are developing over the coming years. Now, in the past years, we have taken, I think, an optimistic view about whether those gaps are real or whether they are apparent. And I think it's probably the case that they are becoming more real, and we will have to find ways in which to close those gaps. And for many of those, we need lead time, because they're not something that you can throw a switch and achieve in a very short order of time. So wouldn't we want to see work done along those lines? Wouldn't we want to see, and I'm not suggesting, I'm not at the moment suggesting that it should be one particular part of the council. Would it not be something that you would want to see done on a fairly broad front? Because with only a few councillors here today on this committee, whereas shouldn't we be involving all councillors? And shouldn't we be looking at perhaps workshops or something along those lines with targets, maybe even for, you know, directorates to say, we're going to allocate a target for a directorate. That's all for discussion, basically. And then how do we achieve those? And that way you're being inclusive in terms of involving all councillors in understanding the challenge and coming up with ideas. And from those, you'll get some idea of the degree of support there might be for those as well in bringing those forward. So I'm just suggesting that we lift ourselves at the moment above the detail here and take a more strategic approach. So those would be my suggestions with regard to recommendations that would go to cabinet, that work should be done along those lines. Pick any one of those or any two or any however many you want of those that you think might be the most fertile, the most helpful. But they're the kind of options that we ought to be considering, in my view. Councillor Pinfold.
I think that makes sense. And I think I'd be interested to hear from Councillor Shires, but I think that sort of high level inclusive approach would be a good one. And I think Councillor Shires alluded to that in sort of when she offered that in terms of corporate plan. So I'm not speaking for her, but I'd be interested to hear. But yeah, I think something along those lines would be sensible, to take that more strategic approach and to involve all councillors, whether that's through a workshop, I don't know. But there are lots of things to talk about and discuss. Thank you.
Councillor Shires.
Yes, I just wanted to touch on where you sort of talked about the fees and charges. That is the third paper that I'm presenting, so we have an opportunity to do that today. If I can kind of read what you're saying, when we come to the point where we're looking at this is what we are anticipating we're going to do. So we've got some ideas, because I knew that through the corporate planning process, giving free range for people to throw their ideas in wasn't as well received as some people who were hoping they'd have ideas to choose from. Would it be more beneficial if, when we're looking at how we're going to budget for service areas and what we may change or what we may implement, would that be useful then to run the workshops from? I'm not adverse to the workshop idea. The more people that understand and commit to what we're doing, the better, in my opinion. And that's not just at a member level, that goes all the way down to officer level. It feels like when we've got an idea of what we're going to do potentially, that we can then run the workshops and have a conversation, and perhaps additional thoughts can be put in at that point, rather than, because it will have to come back to scrutiny anyway. But if we can do an intermediate step of a whole council approach of this is where we would like to be, or this is what we think, then it comes to scrutiny and goes through the process before it goes to full council, I'd be happy for that. But I don't think that sitting in a room like you've just demonstrated now, as in what are your ideas, and you know, members have got a broad range of experience but don't quite know where to funnel them. If we can have more information to help with the choice and thought process, that would potentially be beneficial. And I know that we've got two of our directors sat on the bench, and I would like to know your input from that, really. Because it would be your teams who are having to work the plans up to then present, and I know you've got a larger workload. So Officer Fulcher, Officer Stankley, if you'd like to interject and share your opinions, I'd be more than happy.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I suggest that's a matter for cabinet in a way to decide. If we make recommendations along the lines that I've just explained, that would be a matter for cabinet to decide which of those recommendations or which parts of those recommendations it wanted to focus on, and indeed how that might be delivered. So I'm not sure that I would want necessarily to come up with a detailed plan about how that would be done. I think that that would be something that cabinet would want to run with and consider in the fullness of time. So I'm not going to be prescriptive about how we kind of do that in a way. I just believe that those are the kind of things that we should be looking at in strategic terms. There are decisions that need to be taken along the way about where do we think the most fertile ground might be, where should we focus our efforts, whether you have a workshop, whether you decide to form focus groups, or that really is downstream detail of that. And I would suggest that that's how it could be developed.
Perhaps it's my misunderstanding what you've said then. So my perspective is as a committee, if we give too much detail, then we end up with a state of confusion. And if we don't give enough detail, then we get asked for more detail. I think at this crucial and really important part of the process, and in such an uncertain economic time, I want to be able to take everyone with us on where we are. So even if it is we need to look at you know, service areas and reducing staffing costs, which I know has been mentioned. I don't think it would be fair to just say that without being able to have a conversation with directors and other officers as to how that would happen or what that would impact. I don't think that it would be fruitful to not understand the impact of the decisions we would choose to make, because we will make the decision collectively as a full council. So we need to make a decision on whether or not as a committee we are going to be detail orientated or not detail orientated, because we tend to switch between the two. And if we want more detail, then I'm happy for what I suggested before. And if you just want to offer suggestions without having the conversation, I'm happy for that also. I just want to make sure that every single person in this room understands that there's an invitation to come along through the process and have a real sense of being able to make an impact on the decisions we're going to make, because we're doing this all for North Norfolk. It's not individual. This is a North Norfolk wide decision. So I'm happy for whatever we need to do, but I don't want at any point in the budget setting process for Scrutiny to feel that they haven't had enough opportunity or enough time or enough invitation. In fact, I don't want that for the entire council. We had the frustration of the corporate planning process, and I will not have that again, because we are being open and offering people the chance and opportunity to join us on that journey. So officers are going to be happy. I can't see any disagreement from my cabinet colleagues in the room as to what I'm suggesting. The door's open. So as a committee, decide what you want, and the door is open there for you to come along and do it.
Okay, Mr. Blatch.
Thank you. I appreciate that these figures are quite stark and they take us into a financial position that the authority hasn't been in before. But I also need to try and manage your expectations and others' expectations of process over the next 8 weeks. Bearing in mind, we haven't got a financial settlement and we won't get that until next Monday or Tuesday from the government. But we know that we've got a large hole in our budget compared to where we've been before. Mrs. Stankley has outlined the process which she as Section 151 officer and the accountancy team have put in place. So each of the assistant directors has been asked to identify the scope for savings of at least 10% by this Friday, and then there will be a workshop with the cabinet early next week to inform further discussions early in the new year. I hear your request for that to be an open process, and I absolutely support that principle, but I think we need to manage expectations of what can realistically be achieved during January. This is not a surprise in terms of an annual budget process. We do this every year, and we have been needing to identify savings and efficiencies year on year for many years. So I'm all for supporting deep dives, but I think we need to understand reasonably what can be achieved during the month of January so that you have a balanced budget in February. We need to be careful that that process is managed, because the scale of change or savings that you might need to make will inevitably have staffing implications, and we need to manage that process sensitively. A lot of what the council provides already is on the basis of fixed term contracts, because in recent years increasing government funding has been on a short term or fixed term basis. So I think more than 25% of the people services staff are on fixed term contracts which have end dates in any event. If we look at outsourcing or other means of efficiencies for some other services, there may be staffing implications in terms of downsizing, redundancy, or TUPE to third party providers. So I'm also mindful of your own work programme, Chair, and that's something that we have talked around in terms of managing the length of meetings. And I suppose in terms of the point that Councillor Shires made, there was an inclusive process of open workshops for each of the 5 corporate plan strands. And we, as officers, absolutely recognise the diversity of the membership within the authority, that some people have work commitments outside. But I think the average attendance across those 5 workshops was 7 or 8 members out of 40. And it was never the expectation that every member would be involved in each of the 5 workshops, but we just need to manage that expectation. I've said previously in previous comments this morning that a lot of our exposure, if you like, in terms of choice does sit with a range of discretionary services, because the nature of our local economy and tourism infrastructure, and a lot of those services aren't easily chargeable for, even public toilets. There's issues of use, equity, increased access in tourism areas and all of those things. What the risk is in terms of implementing a charging scheme, in terms of vandalism, because we see vandalism to some of our public car park machines and those sort of things. So there is a lot that needs to be considered or placed in the mix in coming to those decisions. I think there will be clarity, or greater clarity, for the cabinet by next week, with the workshop that they've got organised on Monday. But I think, and we can provide workshops for you, but I think it would be helpful to have a clear steer as to where you would want your focus to be, because I don't think we can go through every budget line and talk about the opportunities for savings. And some of the services, if we do a deep dive on housing, it probably isn't going to take you in a direction of efficiencies and saving, because the need is and the demand is rising. So it will probably take you in the wrong way. I think if you have a workshop on housing, my expectation is across the chamber that you will want to do more rather than less. And that's not a space that we can easily move in a direction of at this present time, given the financial savings that we need to realise.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what you've said, and I think that's useful for us to consider. I think the difference between, for example, the corporate plan strands that we were working with then was that they were fairly broadly based, in the sense that there weren't much in the way of constraints about what we were able to consider, bearing in mind we were talking about themes. What we are focused here is on closing a gap in a budget. A very specific topic. And I would suggest that in terms of managing those expectations, that whatever we do, we need to be able to ensure that members' focus stays within that. And that we don't stray beyond, we don't think about other things. We have to focus on this, because the fact of the matter is that these meetings over the years have considered what was coming down the track in consideration of medium-term financial strategies. I've sat here and listened many times to that emphasis on needing to make preparation, to make savings, because this was going to be a challenge for the future. The point that really you're saying, and I think this is what we all have to understand, is the lead time is very short. And that's down to us, because we had the ability to make those interventions earlier than now. But we are where we are, so there's no point in looking backwards. We have to look forwards, and we have to look and see where we think that there is potential to make savings, to grow income, to fill those gaps. I think I'll hold my piece at that. I've got Councillor Hankley and Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's always more that can be done. In my experience as a consultant of many years, right? One of the problems is sometimes people get too close to the problem. And I think your suggestion of some kind of workshop, like a brainstorming workshop, looking at the main drivers, not the detail, the main drivers, supply and demand, very often can produce quite astounding results. So my suggestion would be that that would be an excellent approach to take. Exactly how that's put together and who's there and so on and so forth. However, I mean, in a brainstorming situation, you suspend judgment. What are the main drivers? What can be done? What has been looked at? What hasn't? And it can very often produce some quite interesting results.
Thank you. Let's hope that positive can be turned into actions of a similar kind. Thank you. Councillor Housden. And then
thank
Councillor Holiday.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have mentioned before, and I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet, that, you know, we are going to be facing difficult times. And I've mentioned it probably twice in the last 2 years. And we're going to be in a very unstable political situation for the next 12 months, whatever anybody says, because there's going to be an election. And the moment there's an election, everything goes into a point of stasis for 6 months. And I think I take what Mr. Blatch is saying about timing, and I think that's absolutely right. But we just need a synthesis of the internal elements that we could consider where savings can be made. And we need a further synthesis of the external elements, which are central government, and how they might impact, more than just assuming we might get something, assuming it could not happen. And I think, I don't want to take time, but I think we need that synthesis internally, and we need somebody or a party to do a synthesis externally for the next, at least the next 12 months, if not the next 24, because we are in a hugely impractical and political maelstrom at the moment, whatever anybody says. You've only got to read the serious financial press and you will see the problems we're in. And the mainstream media just wants to focus on whether Harry and Meghan's charity has lost money or what's the latest Strictly Come Dancing. That's not the issue. The issue here is incredibly serious, and we're only at the very tip of that at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Holiday.
Thank you, Chair. I'd suggest a two-phased approach because we have such a short lead time now, and whatever the history is, I agree with what you said, but what's happened has happened. I suggest we look at what the Cabinet recommends and review that at the next scrutiny meeting because we haven't got the time to do anything else. And then going forward, we've got this great big gap to fill. We have brainstorming sessions starting in January about the budget for next year because we have to be on the front foot rather than on the back foot, which is where we are at the moment. So I would suggest pragmatically, it's not ideal, reviewing what Cabinet suggests for now to close the gap for this year. But the bigger gaps for the next few years, we need to start brainstorming and doing much more creative things with, but we'll have more time.
Thank you. I think that probably chimes with what I had in mind. And we are not a decision-making body. We're not an executive in that regard. We make recommendations, and those recommendations go to Cabinet, and it would be for Cabinet then to decide which of those sort of parts of the recommendations or however it kind of ends up being framed, it wants to run with, and how it delivers that is really a matter for Cabinet, not this committee, in my view. We are here to make recommendations, and I think we need to be quite strategic in those, and there will be lines of inquiry. There will be fertile ground that will emerge as the most suitable to do work on. So that's where I stand. Mrs. Slangley.
That's exactly what we're doing as officers at the moment, that we're reviewing the services that we're delivering and looking the longer term initiatives, because we appreciate that they can't all be achieved in 24-25, but looking at service delivery beyond that for members to decide upon.
Okay, I've got Councillor Withington, and I'd like to close it because we've spent an hour and a bit on it. It would have to be quick, Councillor Toy. Councillor Withington.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate really that this is, and I'm pleased you've just said that, Councillor Stankley, that we are at the stage where we are looking at those savings on costs, etc. But I think it's a little bit unfair to say that this is, just suddenly happened and we haven't been doing anything about it. We started zero budgeting, I think it was 2 financial years ago now, where we did an extremely deep dive into how we were going to make greater efficiencies. That continued last year. And then, as we were aware, we were on this trajectory. And this is now where we're at that stage now, where we're looking, and those costs and efficiencies are being further looked at in terms of 10%. So I think it's important that this meeting, understanding this meeting, is part of a cycle, which this meeting gives us our baseline for us to say, well, okay, this is where we're at. These are the savings we can make. And then as a council and as a cabinet, etc., and as individual members, we are then looking and saying, are you happy with those directions that those savings have gone in? If we don't have this stage where we look at it, we don't appreciate what the differences are. And it might be that officers come forward with particular areas of savings, and we say, well, actually, that is a priority. We'd rather look for greater savings in another area. But, it's a short lead time. And that's the process, unfortunately. Every council faces that.
Great, thank you. Councillor Toy.
Sorry, apologies. Yeah, something we've spoken about before is the way these are presented to people to make it understandable. One of the questions that happened this morning about, is this year's overspend included or not? On page 31, it shows you the base budget plus the updated budget, both are 0, which means it's been dealt with the issues that are already here. The 1.8 is next year. That's not presented in a way that for many people it is understandable. Therefore, presenting, these are things that we have a duty statutory to deliver. These are things that we have a choice about. The way it is presented to people needs to be much clearer rather than a list of numbers to enable people to make those decisions. Now, to do that in short term, but this is the whole reason that you and I have had discussions before about the way it's presented, I think it will enable people to get to those decisions easier. So I just wanted to add that before you wrapped up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that. Councillor Shires and Mrs. Stankley, are you able to, I'm not suggesting you respond to that. All I'm simply saying is that plea has been made by Councillor Toy, and perhaps you can bear that in mind. Thank you. Very quickly, Councillor Holiday, you had your hand.
I just wanted to propose that we did this 2-phase process, that we looked at what cabinet we're going to come up with, and then in next week's meeting and in next month's meeting, and then we go ahead and do something in more depth, because we seem to be, that might be a way forward.
Well, yeah,
Thank
I
you.
mean, the substance of my recommendation was, sorry, Mr. Blanche.
Well, not to wanting to get involved in the politics of choice around this issue, but any of the members on this committee or any of the political groups are able to say at any time which activities or services they would like people, or whether there are ideas around savings. There are choices that the authority has around services and facilities that we do provide, and we appreciate at any time questions being asked about whether that represents value for money or whether savings could be realised there. I don't think it's right for me to suggest examples at here and now, but there are things which we do not have to provide, but which members in this room and indeed the public see as desirable or important or whatever. But if you want to put those forward, we're happy to take those. The officer corps have a view as to where savings could be realised or things could not be done in the future, but they're happy to present those, but politically they may not be acceptable. And there might be reputational management issues that flow as a result of some of those choices. And we would need then through the council's comms team and the relevant portfolio holder to explain those decisions or those choices. But you don't need to leave the room today thinking you have to wait until the week of the 15th of January to have that conversation. If there are things which individually or collectively that you feel should be explored, you know, send an email to your section 151 officer, Mrs. Stankley, and she can either respond to you or factor that in with the relevant service manager or assistant director, because I don't think there's any space that we can't go in seeking to balance the budget, but you do have to make that decision on the 21st of February and a balanced budget, and those conversations in the next few weeks will not be easy. So if there are things that you want to get off your chest now in advance of Christmas, send an email to Mrs. Stankley and she can give due consideration to that. Don't hold on to it till the middle of January.
Thank you for that. And that makes a very good point, actually, because we don't have to wait until the ceremonial meeting, so to speak. We are here to converse with between members and officers 365 days of the year, so to speak. Well, some of us are more operationally perhaps available than others, but the figure of speech is what I'm really aiming at. And we don't have to wait for those occasions. We can do that on a day-to-day basis. Therefore, and that's one of the reasons why I don't want to kind of get too down in amongst the detail, because I think we can easily get lost, as has already been said. We need to take a fairly strategic approach. We need to take a fairly broad and the recommendation that I have outlined basically is that we in the context of the statutory services and the discretionary services that council has to provide, there's a range of considerations that need to be gone through. And that is, how do we challenge the costs? How do we increase our income? And are there ways that we can invest to save that will produce revenue benefits, particularly in the longer term? And I've got the medium-term financial strategy here more in mind, because the invest to save projects, generally speaking, take time to deliver. By time, I mean more than 1 year. And so you don't look at those as being the gap fillers of the current, of the next year's budget, by and large. So that's the kind of recommendation that I got in mind, if I have a seconder for that.
Could I make a point, Mr. Chairman? I do support what Councillor Holliday was saying about how we do that. So I would suggest that is the means by which we get to what you're saying, I think, because that's a sort of a process there.
So we make that recommendation to Cabinet, and Cabinet then makes the decisions with regard to what it wants to focus on and how it wants to implement those. But that's absolutely fine. Councillor, thank you. Did you have your hand up for me? No, I'll take it away. Councillor Bishop, sorry.
I just want to support what Councillor Toy said, because we actually need to know what's necessary and what's desirable before we can enter into this process. And that's particularly important for us newer members.
Thank you. Right, do we have a sufficiently, do I have a seconder for that recommendation? And do we have sufficient clarity? I mean, I'm reluctant to be too detailed about this. It's a fairly broad brush approach. Are you comfortable?
I mean, it might just be worth running through it, I think, on the basis of what Councillor Holliday was proposing.
Yeah, no, I just sort of partly agree with Councillor Penfold, actually, and Councillor Holliday. I mean, I think what Councillor Holliday suggested isn't sort of overruling what you're suggesting, but I think it is a good way of moving forward, a very good way of moving forward.
Do you have sufficient clarity about that recommendation?
If I understand correctly, Councillor Holliday, is that Cabinet, when they undertake their review over the next couple of weeks with the corporate directors, will then come up with their savings proposals for the January Cabinet meeting, and then overview and scrutiny will scrutinise those at your meeting in January and feedback any comments to the February Cabinet meeting. But the second recommendation was around starting the process for looking at next year's budget setting as early as possible. So early next year, we start work on that and getting numbers up to speed. So a much longer lead in time to be more prepared. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know if it's too specific to say that that would include workshops and that's a bit more processy, but that's the general gist of what you said is absolutely right. Thanks.
Yeah, I meant the sort of internal discussions that cabinet have over the next couple of weeks with CLT and senior officers.
Okay, is everybody clear about what we are going to recommend? So I'm prepared to propose that. Seconder, are you seconding it, Councillor Holiday? And can I have a show of hands then to support that? That looks unanimous to me. Thank you very much indeed. Right. Okay, well, we spent, I think, better part of an hour and a half on that, which is probably warrants in terms of the gravity of the situation. So I'm comfortable with that. Moving on then to our next item on the agenda, which is the Treasury Management Strategy Report. Now, before I open on this, I did yesterday email our monitoring officer and Mr. Stankley in respect to the need for some advice on how we might progress this matter, because the requirements in terms of our skill and knowledge and competence, which is outlined in the first few pages, it is quite remarkable, and I would like to have some clarity around the position of this committee, please. So I'll turn to the monitoring officer first.
Yeah, I'll start off and I'll probably refer to Officer Stankley a bit later. I think the purpose of the SIPFA code in regard to relevant members having the skills, knowledge and competence, the purpose of it is that people, both officers and members who have a responsibility for act upon or make decisions on financial matters, need to have an adequate understanding of financial information, and that can be through training. So in regards to key officers currently, or key officers are currently undergoing some training very shortly, and members have had during the induction process some financial training. But here, I think there's talk about some specific treasury management training, and the key members in particular would be members of the GRAC committee and overview and scrutiny. I understand that there are some plans to arrange this training through our treasury management advisors early in the new year. So at this stage, I'll probably refer over to Officer Stankley, who may have a little bit more information about that.
Thank you. Mr. Stankley.
Yes, I think overview and scrutiny are required to review the outturn report with regards to treasury management, and so we can ensure that training is provided prior to that, which will be in September of the year 2024. We can arrange some training for members generally on treasury management in the new year. Link, who are our treasury management advisors, can provide that, and I should imagine that they would be able to provide that on Teams, or it can be in person if members would prefer them.
I think there's a need for a record, isn't there? A formal record of treasury management, capital finance training. Is that something that you have?
I don't think there's a need for a formal record of training of members and officers within the HR department.
Well, I'm just I'm just looking on page 45 where it says that's the case. And for me, that's an emphasizer on the need for members to receive that training and for that members to be current in regard to that training.
Yes, and the need for the training depends upon the complexity of the treasury management strategy. And my view is that this strategy is a fairly straightforward one, in that all of our investments are either held in a money market fund or externally as managed investments, and that we don't have any borrowing at this particular time, which isn't a hugely complex strategy that we have. And I would be more than happy to go over anything that members wish to know either now or at a meeting. But again, the treasury management advisors are more than happy to come in a couple of times a year at no cost to the council to provide treasury management training.
Okay, I thank you for that. And with all due respect, of course, you're viewing that from a professional accountancy point of view. And that may well be your judgment in terms of complexity, but of course, it really is in the view of committee members about how they feel how complex it is and how much they understand and how well trained they feel they are. And that's where I think the key test is. So I think at that point, I would look to you as members to indicate how comfortable you are to proceed with scrutiny of this particular topic, bearing in mind that this particular topic is inextricably linked with the topic that we've just been talking about, the budget, the medium-term financial strategy, and how indeed it might be necessary to make changes to our treasury management in order to accommodate, if not the present, then the future needs of financing the council in the future. So it's with those kind of things in mind that I would ask you as individuals to perhaps express a view on whether you are comfortable to proceed with this piece of business on the training that you have had so far, or whether you would like to pause at that point in order for training to be given and then be better equipped to do that. As a matter for you. So can I have feedback from yourselves then? Councillor Housden?
Well, you've said it actually, because the previous subject really is the context of this subject. And I think the training is essential, because not just for today and looking backwards at the last agenda item, but this is going to come up time and time again as we go through the scrutiny process for the duration until the next local council elections. So I think it's crucial.
So you would like training before consideration of this?
I think probably I would actually, given the severity of what we've just been looking at in the previous agenda item.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vickers, Councillor Holliday, and then Councillor Vickers.
I agree with the need for training, actually. I find it quite complex and I don't understand all terminology.
Thank you.
I think it's important.
Councillor Vickers. Sorry, could you put your microphone on?
Apologies, Chairman. I think paragraph 1.4 training is very specific. Requires the responsible officer to ensure that members with responsibility for treasury management receive adequate training in treasury management. This especially applies to members responsible for scrutiny. So even if you look at the lowest common denominator, us covering our own backs, then I think that training is essential.
Thank you. Any other views? Councillor Toy.
Can I just two things? One, the way it's presented would help, but I feel like I stuck record on that. But how much this is about a strategy? How much actual room is there for manoeuvre within the treasury management? I think that's something that would help people to understand. So where we put our money will depend on how much interest it gains, whether it's in short term, long term. You know, these are things that the treasury, whether it's government bonds, but how much for the size, as you rightly say, in terms of complexity for treasury management, ours is not particularly so, although I understand what you're saying about understandability. So I don't know if how much actual room within that strategy do we have? You know, are we going to spend a lot of time understanding something and actually our strategy is we will put it in the best place where it's going to earn money and we won't borrow unless we have to, and we'll do it for short term. That's the strategy. What effect would it actually have to any bottom lines? Hopefully that made sense. Thank you.
Mr. Blatch. Or Mr. Stanley, whichever.
So I think this authority, compared to many authorities, does have quite simple risks around financial exposure. So we're debt free. You have a volume of reserves which is around £22 million earmarked and general fund, and we have externally appointed financial advisors that inform the authority or manage your portfolio. So we don't have any investments in property assets in other authorities. We don't have commercial investments in retail exposure where a number of authorities have had significant risk. So in terms of training, we can outline all of those models to you, but previously the authority has been confident in its appointment of external treasury management advisors and the portfolio of investments that the authority has in terms of long and short term. So obviously at a national level, because of the financial pressures, and Councillor Housden has said, the relationship with the previous report, as local government finance has become more challenging, we've seen a number of authorities move into a position of issuing Section 114 notices. That's a statutory responsibility that sits with Mrs. Stankley as your Section 151 officer. But we aren't exposed in that way. But you do have a statutory responsibility through scrutiny to, as outlined in paragraph 1.4, as Councillor Vickers has drawn attention to. So there needs to be a degree of confidence amongst members of this committee that the authority is acting appropriately to safeguard its investments and monies. But we aren't. That I would say that needs to be at a proportionate level rather than an in-depth level, because you're not. None of us are money market experts. What we need to be able to satisfy our residents and ratepayers is that we aren't being profligate or wasteful, and the money is safeguarded, and that's what Mrs. Stankley is employed to do for you, and to highlight a statutory responsibility that we aren't moving towards an unsustainable financial position or an unbalanced budget. So I think in the round, we need to agree with you what level of training you want. That doesn't have to be every member of this committee. You can identify 2 or 3 people, if you like, as a subcommittee or a working group or something that has that in-depth knowledge and provides you that advice. Because if you think about the breadth of the council's services and what we provide, no one person in this room or on cabinet or management team or CLT can have that breadth of knowledge and depth of understanding across all of those things. So we need to get this right in terms of proportionality relative to the scale of our budget, our assets, and our risks to financial exposure.
Thank you. Can I just add one other point that you might like to just give us some further advice on? What are the options that we may be talking about in the future? And I'm sure we'll figure in perhaps the invest to save and the homelessness problem. Presumably one of the decisions that this council could take would be to use some of that money that's invested in the reserves to invest in housing, further housing.
That's
as a form of investment.
No, that's something that we're not able to do.
We're not able to do that.
No, we have to finance any capital expenditure, we have to fund it from either capital receipts, which is sale of assets, the the proceeds from sale of assets, either using grant or contributions that we get from outside bodies, revenue expenditure, of which we don't have any spare at the moment because that is the position that we're in. We've got budget issues, revenue budget issues, or by borrowing. And this council doesn't wish to take any more borrowing than is necessary. And that is the only way that we can fund capital expenditure. We can't use the cash, even though we've got the cash invested. It's not about cash, it's about what we've got available in terms of finance for the authority. Very strict definition on what can be used to finance capital expenditure. And so that isn't, it's not an option that is available to council.
Okay, that's helpful to understand that. So if a decision were to be taken, for example, that it was well worth investing to save in further properties, how might that be delivered? And would that have any impact on treasury management?
Yes, it would have an impact because the only way that we could do that if we wanted to spend on purchasing properties would be at the moment to borrow, as we don't have a high level of capital receipts available to us unless we sold a lot of assets. But once you've sold your assets, that's it, they're gone. So you can't generate any income from those assets again. But the borrowing comes at a cost, obviously. At the moment, it's not an ideal time to be borrowing. Interest rates are very high. And we're actually internally borrowing at the moment, and we'll need to take some borrowing out in the future of about 13 million to cover previous capital expenditure decisions that we've taken. But that is an option to the council, but that is where the treasury management strategy would need to be reviewed and scrutinised more closely. I'm confident that the strategy that we've got in place at the moment is sustainable. We have to pay back, if on our borrowing, we have to pay back out of our revenue each year, both the interest and the capital sum, the principal, which you perhaps be more familiar with in terms of maybe your mortgage payments, if anybody has a mortgage or loans, you have principal and interest, and that has to be financed out of revenue. And this is where a lot of these councils have come unstuck in that they haven't been proportionate in their level of borrowing, and they now don't have enough revenue to make those principal repayments through the revenue account. I think borrowing is a sensible approach as long as you're proportionate in the amount that you do. And within the strategy, we would have, if we chose to do that, I would suggest say that we don't allow our, what we call our minimum revenue provision, which is the repayment of that principal, to be more than 5% of our revenue stream, to make sure that it is kept under control and viewed. Yeah.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, because I think in the considerations that in discussions that may well happen in the next few weeks, those kind of options need to be understood, and the implications that flow from them need to be understood. The other thing that I have in my mind is that we have before us today 37 pages in this paper with considerable amount of detail. Presumably that detail is presented to us on the basis that we ought to be aware of that. So I hear what you say with regard to simplicity of our treasury management and so forth, but there is a level of detail in this paper, which, as I said, I'm assuming that you wouldn't have put it before us if you didn't think we need to know it.
A lot of the detail in the paper is information that we are required to present to you, but isn't actually perhaps you perhaps don't need to know everything that is in the paper. Actually, it is just that in acting in accordance with SIPRA's code of practice, this is the template that is provided, and this is the information that we're required to provide. But it is maybe not all of great significance or importance because of the simplicity of our treasury management strategy. We only have, as I said before, some investments in money market funds, which are like short notice deposit accounts, which we can withdraw from and place money into. It helps us with our cash flow management. Or we have externally managed investments, which are fixed and have a long leading time in terms of taking money out of those investments. And we don't have any significant, well, any borrowing externally other than to manage our cash flow at this point in time. And a lot of the information in this relates to that. And a lot of it is to do with investments. If we're operating, borrowing from authorities and other organisations and banks, and it's all about the risk. And as this authority don't tend to do that, there is no risk associated with that. And so a lot of the tables are there for information but don't apply to us.
Okay, thank you. I think my final question is, were we to defer this piece of business today until a later date, because it's pre-scrutiny, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So were we to defer this, would we be able to fit in a package of training that would enable us to scrutinise this before whatever the date is that we would be, presumably it's in line with the budget, is it? Signing off of the budget.
Yes, the budget paper has to be signed by full council before the 11th of March, and the meeting for that is the 21st of February, and the Treasury Management Strategy has to be agreed by the same body that agrees the budget. That would be full council, but I don't think, I'm not sure, but having read the Constitution, I don't think there's a requirement for this to actually come before any other body than full council. I don't know if it's on the Constitution, but there would be time to have the training, subject to link being available, and we could have it. We might need to ask if we could move the overview and scrutiny meeting by a week to not only help with that process, but also to give us a bit of extra time with the budget paper as well. But we could look at that in the work programme. But we could, subject to.
You could do that.
Yes.
And from what you said, you look as though, it sounds as though you're looking to move the overview and scrutiny meeting by a week in any event. Is that correct?
Yes, I was going to ask you if as
Right.
part of the work programme, when we come to that item, whether you as chair and the committee would consider that. Please.
Well, that's something we can consider today. Councillor Penfold.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure about this one really, because I think, I'm not sure it's good form that we have a report in front of us. We're asked for a recommendation, and then in the meeting itself, we suggest that we need more training on it. We should have done that earlier. We knew this was coming. We've had them before. So I, for one, would be happy to proceed as we've been asked to proceed today, but I recognise that's not the case for everyone. But I just don't like having this here right now in front of us and suddenly saying we need training on it. That should have been identified a while ago. If we think we do need training.
You raise a very good point, because the whole, you'll remember that you and I attended a pre-scrutiny meeting, not pre-scrutiny, pre-agenda meeting. And that pre-agenda meeting, we considered the work programme, but we had no papers whatsoever. And had this paper been available, might be one of the things that we would have identified. So your point is very well made. So there's a wider point here. We don't hold pre-agenda meetings for the sake of it. We hold them for a very good purpose of ensuring that business is ready to be transacted.
Some members who have been here for a while will remember that we used to run treasury management training for the committee on an annual basis. I did check that yesterday. The last time it was, so finance used to arrange that for us through Ireland Coast for the treasury management advisors. And it was arranged in February 2020 for April 2020. Obviously the pandemic happened and it hasn't taken place since then. So it is something that's sort of been on the radar but hasn't happened. So it was a standard annual event for members as part of the budget setting process. It is something that is in your terms of reference that you have to scrutinise treasury management strategy. So it is something we need to get in place, whether you have it now or not, but we definitely do need to get that back on track for members.
Councillor Penfold.
Thank you. Yeah, well, that would seem entirely sensible to get that back on track. And I do take your point about the pre-scrutiny meeting, that it would have been, you know, you and I. Sorry, the agenda that you and I had with them. Yes, that would have been useful. Then we could have discussed this. What we couldn't have done then is a sort of assessed other committee members' training needs, because it obviously just the three of us. But having those papers there at that pre-agenda is clearly helpful.
I'm mindful of new committee members. I mean, speaking for myself, I couldn't recall having treasury management training, but I'm just one member of this committee, and I'm mindful that there are several that have not had that. And is it fair to conduct a piece of business on which we're asking people to vote, and they haven't had the training, when this paper makes it very clear that responsibility for scrutiny of the strategy rests with this committee?
So I think there's two issues there then, isn't there, Chair? And you know, officers have to take some responsibility for this. So I apologise that we haven't factored that in sooner. Obviously, Mrs. Denny has explained the position historically. You now have a different treasury management provider, and I've just asked Mrs. Stangley whether Link are able to provide the same level of training that Arlene Close used to provide, and she's advised that they have. So we have a 4-year cycle, so there will be people in this room who under the previous arrangements wouldn't have had training until this point in time, February next year. Arguably, we should have considered whether we should have included treasury management within your induction programme following the elections in May, and that's something we will have to take away. But in any ordinary cycle, the training would have been organised as part of the budget process, so it should have been in February. And I think we need to take that away from this meeting and see how quickly that can be arranged and for that a date to be proposed.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would appreciate or support a training programme as long as it was two-way, because I think there is an issue with overcomplication in these documents. Some of it, as we've learned, is absolutely statutory, if you like. However, I think things could be better understood through some kind of training program, as long as members were able to say, could it be better put in this way rather than that way? So I'd support that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Houghton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I find it slightly nonsensical. Officer Stankley has said that the officers are under an obligation to present us all the information, and yet actually there is a slight gap perhaps for some of us, and I include myself, in the full understanding of how we interpret that information. That to me is a slightly nonsensical position, and I think we should be put in the position or educated to be in the position where we can fully assimilate the information and make the decisions that are required. And as I will reiterate it, the previous agenda item is going to come again and again and again. It's not going away, and we do need to see what options. You opened up a question about an option. There are others that I would open up. I'm not going to today, that I have no idea whether it's within the capacity of this district council to do these things, but I think we need to fully understand it and quickly.
Thank you. Right, I think we've spoken enough about it. I'd like a show of hands on those who are content to proceed to consider this business today. Can I have a show of hands? Okay. Well, in all honesty, I probably would join you because I would rely on my experience and previous training. But on the other hand, I would question whether my currency is where it ought to be. So on that basis, I would join, I think, and express my concern as well. So is it your wish then that we should defer this matter until we've had the training? Okay, thank you. So that matter is deferred. Right, we've been going almost 2 hours. I'm going to take a 5-minute break at this point, and we'll reconvene then at what will be 37 on the clock on the wall. Yep.
Thank you. I won't add too much in because I know the committee's been sitting for quite a while now. All the information's in the paper. We can see it broken down by service area as to what is being looked at. Currently, the information that I want you to look at is on the back pages, obviously, from page 81 onwards. We can see that in the end two columns, we've got whether or not a service is statutory or discretionary. And then we have got in the end column, who sets the amount we can charge for that service. So that should help inform some discussion. And I really want some focus on this today, purely because we spoke on the first paper that I introduced about we're looking to make savings. Well, this is how we generate our income in other ways as well. But this is the one thing that we can really look at and drill down into. I won't ask or inform any more. I will leave it to the committee to then start probing and prompting if you're happy for that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm conscious that earlier on we were talking about salaries all being increased, and it was some of the reason that the budget needed to. I'm looking at page 93 and commercial services food inspectors, officers' time, we're charging £4 an hour less than what we were previously. Is that a mistake?
Who'd like to take that?
Sorry,
Sorry,
page
yeah.
93,
Yeah.
commercial services,
Yeah,
officers' time per hour. Previously was £44, it's now £40 if their salaries came down.
I'll have to check that. It may be that the service can only recover its costs. And if it can only recover its costs, if the costs have gone down, then that's maybe why the rate has gone down per hour. But I will have to check that for you and then come back to you on that one.
Thank you.
Okay, if we have a written response to the committee, please, as an answer to that. Thank you. Councillor Housden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 83, or 83 on the digital version, communications. Filming and charges for filming at the pier seem to be incredibly cheap. I know what I charge for work that I do on a daily basis, and I think that's incredibly cheap for an iconic structure such as the pier. Very cheap. And you know, we don't have many piers of that quality left around our coastline anymore. And I think we should see it as such. And every time you pick up the Telegraph or the Weekend Times, the Norfolk coast is quoted, and therefore we should be making absolute capital of Norfolk Pier, Cromer Pier.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bletch.
I think that's a really good example to highlight, and it's an issue where there is choice and competition in the market. So I can tell you that when we had the BBC Antiques Roadshow to North Norfolk in the summer of 2018, summer of 2018, that they approached us and we made them welcome on the pier and on the promenade. And then, if you recall, there was the BBC ident, Christmas ident, with the young person on the bus and the helter-skelter, and all the pier was decorated. The BBC did ask for, they did go to other piers and were quoted a very expensive price for the use of the pier for that ident. And then they approached us and said, you did, you accommodated us really well for BBC Antiques Roadshow. Is there an opportunity for us to use Chroma Pier? And we just looked at our cost recovery for that in terms of property services, closing the pier and facilitating that event. They obviously met all the costs of the funfair rides that were placed on the pier. And the free advertising that brought on national BBC television over the Christmas and New Year period is huge. You couldn't pay for that. And so there is a price point and there is a choice in terms of our competitive position and the free advertising. So whilst we can talk about this, and it's absolutely within the members' gift to do that, and if we have had Marks and Spencers use it for clothing adverts, so where it's not specifically identifying Chroma. I think Bowden has used it as well. Where it's just a setting, we would obviously take a commercial approach to the use of that venue. But where it is very place specific and you can see that it's Chroma, a view is taken about the free benefit that would be derived by using that as a film location. So I hope that's helpful, but that's one of the choices that in terms of setting the budget is in front of you, because we could set an artificially high price, and then we could see those inquiries lost to somewhere else and we wouldn't get the free benefit.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and I appreciate that. That's good. A wildlife park charged 3 times that amount, and there are several of those in Norfolk. The other thing, and I'll throw that in here, the Tour de France is the biggest promotion in France. You know, you and I have discussed cycling. The opportunity to host any race in this country should be taken, and particularly here, because the TV revenue and the spin-off is phenomenal. That's all I'll say.
Can I just follow up what you just said there, Ms. Blatch? What advice do we take with regard to pricing?
So the service manager does make comparisons with other places. Councillor Housden is correct. We know that in terms of film presence in Norfolk, there is increasing film and TV production capability within the county. There are locations in North Norfolk that are commercial entities and do have a daily fee which is significant, and it depends on the nature of the production and the use of a venue. We make assessments in terms of film access, location, beaches, whether we lose car parking income. If we were to accommodate something in the middle of summer, we would need to offset loss of revenue if we give a car park, whereas if it's filmed in November and it's on a beach, you know, then the number of people that would be parking at Sea Pauling, for instance, would be nominal. So there is a degree of officer discretion around that within those parameters and in consultation with the leader of the council or the portfolio holder. But this is obviously a public statement of the level of charge that might be levied, and it might be that, you know, members feel that that is too low, but those are the subjective decisions that need to be discussed and explored through member officer conversations.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I appreciate that there's going to be a difference between the beach at Sea Pauling, for example, on a November's day versus the pier on a summer's day.
Absolutely.
For a shoot. I guess my concern really is just how we might kind of refine that advice and perhaps just close the gap or the apparent gap that there might be between the kind of charges that Councillor Housden has referred to and what we might be charging. And the other thing is that, yes, I take your point with regard to advertising value. You wouldn't be able to to perhaps buy that easily with regard to promoting the pier. But I'm just wondering how that comes back to the council, actually.
May I just add, is there any way of quantifying that latent potential, that latent spin-off or not?
So it depends. It depends, doesn't it? It depends on the nature of the film or television production. So if it is, if it's a series like All Creatures Great and Small, like Heartbeat, more recently like Vera or Shetland, there will be where there are repeat, or it's a series and there's 8 episodes of series and it's repeated, 4 or 5 times over an extended period of time. People take holidays; they want to go and see where things have been filmed and that sort of thing. So that would have a different impact to something that's a one-off drama that might that might use the chroma, and it will be synonymous with chroma, but there isn't an enduring or long-term impact. So it depends. I mean, what do we do? What would we do if Good Morning Britain or BBC Breakfast come and say, can we stand on the forecourt of the Hotel de Paris or on Cromer Pier to do the breakfast weather bulletin? Do we say, well, that's really positive? It doesn't matter what the weather is, does it? They're in Cromer. Hopefully the sun will shine, or but do you know what I mean? Depends on the time of year, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, do we make a charge for that, or do we just facilitate that through property services? And we need to make a judgment, because that is free television to a mass audience. Whereas if it was a more specialist production in terms of a news item or something, there'd still be a cost which we would probably want to recover if it was a documentary type thing rather than a live news stream. But all of those things. So do we cover our costs? Do we subsidise? Do we place it competitively in the market? And what impacts all of those things in terms of that benefit? There will be some metrics that we could measure, but it wouldn't be an exact science.
And sorry, I don't mean to prolong this. Do we ever ask for any copyright so that we can screen things within Norfolk District Council from films that have been shot here, as a promotional element?
So I think Joe Ferrari and Felix Brueggemann of the comms team do have license agreements, and there will be some sort of conversation around those issues. But I don't know the exact terms that it would probably depend on the nature of the proposition. What I can say is that there has been consideration at a Norfolk level around operating a film office, and it was felt initially in the initial stages of that work that this would film locations using local authority assets, not just in North Norfolk but elsewhere, could be a source of income stream. I think the direction of travel of the industry is that isn't the case, that they are almost looking for incentive payments to come and film in a location, because Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, they have film offices and they're offering incentive payments to businesses, Apple TV, those sort of things, Netflix, to host or to be filmed in those locations because of the wider economic benefits, spin-offs and potential visitor numbers. So this is probably a declining market in terms of the source of income for North Norfolk District Council, even if the pier is an iconic structure. So it's about balance, but it's a choice that you have, and officers need to respect that in terms of that price point.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Penfold and then Councillor Brown.
I think most of my questions have been answered. They were around the pier, actually, because it does seem low, but I take what you've just said, Steve, that it might be a declining market, but it'd be interesting to know that. And whether you mentioned sort of competitors, whether we've done any benchmark or peer marking, I should say, whether we know what other peers might be charging. But question really, are we, because it's probably not just the pier, although that is iconic, as you say, are we proactive in that sense, or are we reactive in waiting for sort of approaches to be made to us, or do we get ourselves out there and say, look, this is what we've got?
So at the moment it's a bit of both. We are in Norfolk, we believe we're the largest recipient of film and TV production inquiries. I think that that's been established through the county council work that's been undertaken. But the principle of local authority partners in Norfolk considering a dedicated film officer or film office is to promote Norfolk as a location for filming in what is an increasingly competitive market. So other parts of the country, of the UK, the devolved nations and regions of the UK are ahead of Norfolk in that space in terms of having a film office coordinating resource that actively positively promotes rather than just receiving inquiries.
Councillor
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak. With my scrutiny eye as the planning and enforcement portfolio holder, can I just draw members' attention to paragraph 3.9 on page 77, which deals with planning fees as a statutory function. And there's an intention to increase fees, but we're waiting for information on that. Well, actually, we need wait no longer. The Levelling Up and Regeneration Act has generously allowed our planning service to increase planning fees for major developments by 35% and for domestic applications by 25% as from the 6th of December, i.e. this month. They will from the 1st of April 25 increase by the rate of inflation. So they will be index linked moving forward, something which hasn't happened in the past, subject to a 10% cap, and they will be reviewed every 3 years. So that's welcome news. So the report of there isn't a date on this, something perhaps that we should be doing on our reports generally, not just this one. There isn't a publication date on this report, but it's clearly in need of updating in respect of what I've just said. So we need to obviously be taking into account the increase in income moving forward when we're budget setting, which I hope we will do and take into account. Having said that, my gratitude is tempered somewhat insofar as no hike in fees will cover the actual cost of the service. We're still dependent on central rate support grants from governments, which we all know are severely under pressure. So we're perhaps not out of the woods in terms of the service wiping its face economically, but it's certainly a step in the right direction, Mr. Chairman. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you for that. That's good news. Every little helps, as they say. Councillor Boyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's page 87. On the tone of every little helps. I was looking at the car parking, and I know some of it, generally it's staying the same, but I did feel that it was very reasonable to park in Holt for £2.30, where if you go to Sheringham Park or Felbrigg, it's at least double that. And I could either go to Cromer for just over an hour, or I could spend the whole day in Holt Park for the same sort of money. And I wondered if that's one that we could, you know, under investigation could be tweaked up somewhat, because it's not in line with other, much as we want to encourage people to go and be healthy and outside, and yet they've put only by £1, but they've put up the fee for the children's trips by £1, but left the other the same. That was just a comment.
Okay. Mrs. Stankley.
Yes, the car parking fees and charges haven't been reviewed in their entirety, and that is a bigger piece of work than is usually taken place with the fees and charges report. So that is usually considered separately, but that has already been identified by officers as to whether £5 would be a more reasonable amount for Whole Country Park.
Yeah,
But
thank you.
that will come back to members once they've been reviewed.
Okay.
Sorry, it was a quiet thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Withington.
Can I pick up on what councillor Brown has just said, because it raised some thoughts in my head. I see in the report that we have put in an 8% increase in charges to cover the additional costs of staffing, inflation and etc. And I'm fairly confident with the conversations that I've had with people that we are taking account of the additional resource costs that we have. Obviously, running a service isn't just the people in it, it's the place, the IT, the software and all those other things that are required as well. So I'm confident in that. And we've heard that planning statutory government set costs have gone up. It's very apparent on page 101 I was looking that, you know, we're putting our car charges up, but the government ones aren't. Is there any move anywhere for those to be set up to go up in other sectors of our council? Or is there anything we can do to try and push for that? Because obviously we're doing everything we can to increase our revenue, but we seem to have a situation where we've got the same costs, increased costs rather, and the same revenue coming in to cover them with the government decided ones.
Yes, where they're set by the government, they either actually prescribe the amount that we are allowed to charge for a service, or they provide guidance as to how we should calculate that amount. So it either is, as I said earlier, with certain services, you can only charge the amount that covers the cost of the service.
Right.
So you can't add in a little profit element. Or, as I say, they're set by the government and we can't do anything about that. So there is very little room for manoeuvre at all with the charges that are set by the government.
Can I have a supplementary, please, Chair? Thank you. Do we actually know then on those government ones which are not, we just have to cover the cost and that it, but the other ones, do we know whether we are covering costs from those, or, you know, does it cost us more than we're getting in on those areas where it's a prescribed cost?
We would calculate them on the basis if it was a fee that we could set to recover costs, then we would ensure that we did recover the costs. We wouldn't undercharge in those instances. Yeah.
Councillor Holiday.
Okay, one minor point, and that's, so if what we're recommending then is that the fees and charges, but minus the car park, basically, because that hasn't been set. Because it looks at the moment as if we're recommending the car park charges to stay as they are, but you're saying that there's a work party that's going to be looking at that and that may change.
Councillor Shires.
Now, this is pre-scrutiny. So like I said, when I opened up, it's if you don't agree with something, air it now. Because this still has to go to cabinet. So if there's a recommendation that you would want us to look at something differently, or you think something's too high or too low, make that recommendation. And when it comes to cabinet, we'll have the conversation about it. So we're not asking for agreement. This is pre-scrutiny before it goes to cabinet. You're the first committee that this is coming to.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that I wasn't signing off on the car park charges. That was on my recommendation, but thank you very much. Going back to planning, just take an example. I'm just thinking we're increasing things by inflation sometimes, but are there any areas where, without any detriment whatsoever to our population, that our residents, whether we could increase by more than inflation? I was just thinking about garden bins, actually. I'm sure it's an unpopular topic, but I was just looking at planning on page 108, where we've got some discretionary charges which we haven't put up, which do involve manpower. And I know that manpower has been factored into some of the others, but for example, additional plans and additional meetings in planning haven't shifted at all. And I just wondered if there were some areas where we could perhaps increase fees a little bit. Thank you.
Mrs. Franklin. Right.
Sorry, with the fees and charges, we round up to the nearest 50p or a pound. So there are some that have been increasing for years, but because they still round up to that nearest pound, it appears that they've been at a static level for a number of years. Also, we do consider, as you would probably hope that we might, that we consider the market that we're operating in terms of whether we're operating in a competitive market or whether we're the only service providers, and also who we're providing the service to and what service we're providing, in terms of, you know, whether we're providing services to vulnerable people or not, you know, the type of people that we're providing services to and whether they can afford the increases. So there's lots of considerations in setting the fees and charges, but we will have another look at them again as part of the budget setting process to make sure that we do think that we're maximising our income through the level of fees that we're charging.
Thank you. Councillor Housden.
Yeah, just a quick one on betting premises and licensing. The annual fees, are they, what sort of UK-wide relevance do they have? Are they the industry standard, or is there room for manoeuvre there? I mean, given the turnover at a betting shop, we could be doing really nicely, but I just wonder what those fees relate to.
Could you just say what page?
Oh, sorry, yeah, page 97. It's other licensing, premises license fees, particularly the annual fees, really. I understand the variations of the applications, but an annual fee for a betting premises doesn't seem to be very much money to me, given what that industry turns over and makes.
Yeah, again, these services can be set, the fees and charges can be set by the district, but there may be guidance in terms of size of the business or size of the property. I don't know personally, off the top of my head, I'd have to come back to you in terms of what leeway there is in terms of increasing those fees and charges, and whether we can vary them at all. I would have to do a bit of investigation for you.
I just would like to know as a point of interest, most certainly. Thank you.
Right, are we all done? I've noted, I think that amongst our discussions, we've talked about commercial approach. We talked about benchmarking. We talked about, I guess, market forces that would perhaps cause our charges to be adjusted to match those which are competitive or appropriate for the area. I'm assuming that that is done as a matter of routine, but I think it would be likely that this committee would want to be assured that all of those things were happening across the range of charges where that is possible to apply. Obviously, those where they are fixed by some other formula, well, we have to abide by those. But where there is discretion, that we are applying those kind of guides to judge whether we are under, over, or on the mark. So would that be a general recommendation that you would support, that Cabinet ensures that those charges that we have, that there is discretion over, that they are reviewed with those guides in mind? And I don't think there's no sort of we might call absolutes about these. They're all kind of relatives, and sometimes it is a matter of finger into the wind, and you either set them too high or too low, and it is quite difficult. And I take into account as well, there are other, if you like, in-kind benefits that one might arrive at, but we need to make sure that our charges are competitive. So with that recommendation in mind, are you content then to approve the council's approved charges and fees for 24-25 with that recommendation added on to that? I've got Councillor Fisher as a proposer, Councillor Hankins as seconder. Can I have a show of hands then, please? Thank you. That looks like unanimous to me. Right. Okay. Thank you. That completes that item of business. Moving on then to on next, which is the Cabinet Work Programme. Over to you, Alan.
So as most aware, there wasn't a cabinet meeting in December, so there is slightly more business in January than perhaps we would usually expect to see. So just I think, I mean, as you can see, I've split out the finance reports into separate items on the cabinet work programme. They will come as they have to scrutiny. So the treasury management one will include the capital strategy and the investment strategy. I understand the housing allocations policy review is likely to come through slightly later now, probably around March time. And the property transactions relating to Sheringham and Fakenham will come through to February. And the levelling up fund update is going to full council this month. So yeah, there is a slight adjustment there. Otherwise, I think, oh, and the risk management framework will be going through later as well. So that will be adjusted and go onto the website in the next couple of days. There's always a bit of change between when I put this on the agenda and then we start the preparation for cabinet.
Okay, thanks for that. Any questions, Councillor Boyle?
Is this an appropriate time to discuss for future items to the committee for I was thinking of HOSC. It's not on the, it never comes up on the necessarily on the agenda. I was wondering whether it might be a recommendation that we had that it came up for discussion just briefly at each meeting with an update, because it's quite, you know, useful to our local residents.
I think so. This is in
Not
relation
for,
to
oh,
the
sorry, not
scrutiny
for
work
cabinet. I
programme.
lost, sorry, I missed that.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry.
well, we're just going on to that. So
Yes,
I think
I think you might be one ahead of us. Any others that relevant to the cabinet work programme? No. Moving on then to the scrutiny work programme.
yes, so I'm just, so as you can see, for January, we've got the local economic strategy and action plan coming through. That was moved back a month. I have received a request that the beachlets and chalets monitoring comes through to February. Again, the levelling up fund, I think there will be an update to the committee in April time, but again, the sort of introduction to that is going through to full council this month. I've sought some clarification on the performance measures report and the benchmarking report, because we're not entirely sure that that will be ready to come through just yet, but as soon as I have some confirmation from the data analyst around that, I will update you. And obviously we've got the peer review action plan on there as well, which will be coming through following cabinet. So I think you wanted to say something in relation to that as well, Chairman. And then if Councillor Boyle's request that there's just a monthly update from the HOSC.
Okay, thank you.
They do meet every other month, so we could even update every other month, but I think it would be very useful to have the information back on a regular basis.
Okay. In connection with the peer review action plan, I think it's right to say that we had a discussion at the pre-agenda meeting with regard to how we might move this forward. If you remember last meeting, I think we agreed in a starting position here that we would want to keep an open mind and would want to deal with the observations of that report in some detail. And our discussions at pre-agenda revolved around the merit of holding perhaps a facilitated workshop. So this would be facilitated by, I think there is a Centre for Scrutiny, National Centre. If we had if we had an external facilitator to take us through the consideration of of that report and how we need to respond to that. That would enable, I think, us to work our way through that. I ought to say that we have at the back of the room our future scrutiny officer, Neil, has been observing us all today and our various behaviours. So we may hear more about those at a later date. But what we also decided was that it was worth delaying taking any action until he joins us, and that's on the 8th of January, where he would be fully in place to be able to lead us through that process and make those arrangements for a facilitated workshop to enable that to be progressed. Mr. Blatch.
Can I just ask for a point of clarification in that respect then? Is that in the recommendation made in respect of the workings of overview and scrutiny, or is it the recommendations of the peer review report in its entirety? Because I think in terms of a brief that Mrs. Denny or Mr. White would need to give to the consultant or advisor, we would need clarification or clarity around that point, because there was a recommendation made around ONS and how that related and added value to the council's work. But there are obviously other recommendations in terms of the alignment of resources with the corporate plan, which we're dealing with through the budget preparation, whether we have resources aligned in a way which addresses that, given the observations made around the obligations and responsibilities of the statutory officers. And by that, I mean myself, Mrs. Stangley and Ms. Jordan. And so there's a work programme that's being developed around that piece of work. And there was a recommendation that the authority should look at undertaking a staff survey, and a small project team's been established to take that forward during the latter half of January, and would then inform a new organisational development plan. So I suppose it would be helpful in terms of what you've just outlined and the discussions that took place at pre-scrutiny, which hadn't been shared with me previously, as to whether you want that piece of work to be the whole, a facilitated workshop on the whole of the report, or on the scrutiny issues and comments that were made.
Well, you raise a good, relevant point. I have to say that my considerations had been those in respect to scrutiny. I think it would also be appropriate where there were connections that scrutiny had with other parts of the organisation, and how it works and relates would be, I think, probably wise to include those. So they would be the interfaces basically between scrutiny and the rest of the organisation. I would automatically consider those to be valid in as part of that. But I think from reading the report, there is sufficient for us to consider with regard to the operation of this committee in the first instance, and then second to that would be those issues which are, if you like, peripheral but related to the committee.
That clarification is helpful, and we can move forward on that basis. Thank you.
So unless anybody's got any other thoughts along those, Councillor Toy?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, allowing me to speak. Just in terms of also the peer review, something we have spoken about before is just, it talked about the division between yourselves and my committee, GRAC. So obviously, we need to find a way just to, at least in that initial discussion, so you can then concentrate on your bits and we can concentrate on ours, to save you doing work on anything that may end up in the GRAC arena. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's covered by that, and I would automatically consider those, as I say, those wider aspects as being part of that, because we don't exist as an island. We are a part of an integral, an integrated organisation, or we should be, and so we need to make sure that we are. Councillor Houghton.
Just picking up on that point, Mr. Chairman, the actual report said peers recommend the relationship between Cabinet, ONS and GRAC are clarified, along with the roles and responsibilities of each. Yeah.
So those would be a part of that.
The peer review process is around corporate learning and development, so it's an absolutely appropriate space and conversation to have around how we work efficiently and smartly, and how we add value to the work of the council. And a lot of what we've discussed this morning about the deep dives or areas of budget scrutiny need to be seen in that context, because is it useful to bring the same reports to all three committees? What is the separation of responsibilities across those three committees, and how do we add value to that? Because we are in a constrained environment. If you want officers to attend and engage with you at an appropriate level, we need to be able to do that where there are clear lines of reporting and decision making where value is added, because otherwise we just go around, I fear we just go around the loop 2 or 3
Yeah.
times without actually making decisions and moving those forward. So I think it's an absolutely essential piece of work. I just wanted that clarification of whether it was the whole report or just the area of scrutiny, but that's how.
And I think, as we can go into these reports and be definitive in the recommendations that we put forward, whether it's to cabinet or to GRAC or whatever, then I think that is the crucial function, and that if it facilitates that will be absolutely the right thing to be doing. Yeah.
Yes, I think, well, were we to take on the whole report, I think that we will be taking on a pretty big piece of business.
I know that.
So I think we need to confine ourselves to that which is relevant and how we relate to the rest of the organisation in that way. So I think we've covered that. Hopefully that's sufficient to give you and Neil as a starter for 10 come the new year. Right. Any other questions on the work programme? Oh yes, Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just to support your decision there on a facilitated workshop. Excellent idea, and Officer White can help arrange that, and also to support Councillor Boyle's suggestion for a bi-monthly HOSC update. I think that would be very useful, given the importance of that to our residents as well. Thank you.
Yes, I think the nature of our business and how we relate to other organisations, and HOSC being one of them, is something that we probably need to have some flexibility around, because there are times when topics are particularly high profile and relevant to North Norfolk, and other times when perhaps the agenda is, shall we say, not quite so. So there's always flexibility to fit in updates. And I think in particular, the report that you made with regard to the dental service matter, for that to be circulated amongst the committee is an effective way of covering, that responsibility, because it gives us the opportunity of reading that in our leisure and providing you're comfortable with, if you're comfortable with having, if you like, clarification questions coming to you, we can probably cover that in a very efficient way.
So are you saying you think it's a good idea to have a bi-monthly update into the work programme?
There's no harm in putting it there.
Yeah,
the substance of it.
It can be flexible, and if there's not much to report, then we just
I wouldn't want though to be, it's a bit like we were saying earlier. We don't need to wait for the occasions to come.
Of course,
because often those kind of things are time related, and if they are current and topical at the time, then we need to hear them and deal with them if necessary. Okay, I think that covers all our agenda today.
We just want to agree on the change of date for the.
Yes, that is true. Yes, the change of date. Yes. Before we.
Yes, just with regard to the amount of work that will need to be undertaken with balancing the budget, whether the committee would consider moving the date to a week later, but I'm not sure how that fits in with everybody's diaries, but it would give us an extra week. If you wanted to pre-scrutinise the budget paper before cabinet on the, it's 5th of February, actually, I think earlier on I said it was the 8th, but it's actually 5th of February. Otherwise it would be post-scrutiny.
I get the logic of it. I'm not sure about the logistics of it though.
So that would, if they push it back a week, that would take you to the 24th of January, which is okay looking at the calendar, as long as, I mean, I can circulate an email to members just to check. I'm just all shaking his head. I
can't
don't
do
know
that,
if it
I'm afraid.
clashes with other meetings that,
I'll be away for a week in Amsterdam then.
but um, it is quite tight to get recommendations through to cabinet. It'll just be a question of having to collate them and take them. They won't be included in the cabinet agenda. We'll just have to report them at the meeting, but that's doable.
So the date would be
Wednesday, the 24th.
Wednesday, the 24th. Okay. Other than councillor Penfold, does that present a,
I would have to give my apologies for that. Yeah, that's Mrs. Penfold would never forgive me.
can
I
we
give her a blown
accommodate that?
holiday.
Okay, right. Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Given the appalling situation in terms of flooding and fields that are waterlogged, etc., as I understand it, we have made a significant contribution to 2 drainage boards. Those drainage boards have a member on them, I understand. I think it would, I'm making a recommendation that those members make a report to the relevant committee as to what progress has been made and what their future plans are.
Next week, we have a full council meeting.
Mhm.
Is there time for those members to give a report
Probably
at full
not.
council?
I don't know, but certainly to this committee.
So do you mean, sorry, Councillor Hankins, you mean asking someone from the drainage board to
Yes.
come in to report to this
Yes,
committee? Yeah. Rather than the members responsible
Yeah,
here,
well,
you mean a member of the internal drainage
yeah,
board to come in?
right. Whatever is most expedient, quite frankly.
We do have
Oh,
several
so you're
members
not
of
talking
the-
about the actual our appointed representatives then giving the report, or are you?
Well, I think that should be a regular feature.
Well,
But
it's not.
pardon?
Or if it is, I've missed them for many years.
Mr. Chairman, I might be able to help you a bit on this because I sit on the Internal Rivers Internal Drainage Board. And it's a difficult one with the flooding because whilst the internal rivers are effectively under the auspices of the wider farming communities, probably the best way of putting it, they're also the main draining is reliant on the Environment Agency, and there their hands are tied. Now, I can get the minutes from the last meeting if you'd like, if needed, I could probably have them circulated. But I mean, it's a very complex issue, and given what's happened with the amount of groundwater, it's not something that they would sit in this committee or full council or any committee and be able to give solutions and say what we're doing, because at every turn it relies as much on the Environment Agency and Anglian Water as it does and to the internal drainage boards. So it's not a straightforward situation, and the internal drainage boards will be clearing and doing all their drainage work deliberately. But the point is, it's not there that the main issues and problems arise.
I have to say I concur with what you say, because in my area, it is very complex, and although there are internal drainage boards, responsibility, particularly for surface water flooding, is extremely bespoken. And I thought when you raised that, I thought that you were talking more in general terms about us not having a report from internal drainage board representatives.
That's correct.
So, but I guess my take on that is that might be something that would be more appropriate to full council, where everybody's there to hear that, or that it gets circulated in a written form so that again everybody can would be aware of it. So anyway,
I will take your advice on that.
well, I don't think there's a unique way of doing it. I think there is probably a need to share some of that information. There are multiple ways in which it might be done, which might be the best. You might kind of want to review after it's been tried a few times, but yes, I'm mindful that that was an AOB item and we don't have an AOB agenda item. So I am anxious to close the meeting and I don't want to open up another conversation other than in principle to, take up what you just said, and perhaps that can be progressed as a proposal. Councillor Withington.
Oh, don't say it like that, Chair. I think councillor Hankin, I got the feeling, was thinking that that was related to the work programme for ONS.
That's what I thought.
And it seems to me that this is actually quite relevant. It's one of those areas that are linked to what we're trying to do with the budget, in that I'm not sure myself how much the levy is. I'm sure councillor Stankley can. Sorry,
About
I've
93.
demoted you, I'm afraid. Officer Stankley can probably tell us what that is or not, or if not, let us know, because I think there'd be quite a few people who'd be interested in that. But, it seems that we just hear about this levy and we don't know, even in scrutiny, what's being done for that. Or
Perhaps that information could be circulated after the meeting. I think whether or not that's a piece of business for this committee clearly is something for be considered, because there is a checklist that we would want to go through in terms of whether that's the best way of dealing with that or
I
not.
think, yes, with due respect, Chair, I think this is about us having that outward focus and looking at our partners and how they are serving our district and our residents. And I think
I don't doubt that for a moment, but every piece of business that we take on, we should look at using our topic. And if I knew what the topic letters stood for, I would say them, but I don't. But there is a checklist that we compare, that we use to accept items of new business, and we ought to do that as part of the consideration of that matter.
okay.
Okay. Right. Okay, then, if that's the end, I will formally close the meeting and wish you all the very best for the festive season.